is Inside Story. Hello, a warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, on Monday, the Israeli Foreign Ministry said that Israel had cut working relations with the United Nations Human Rights Council. Israel said it will also prevent a UN team from entering the country to assess the effects of settlements on Palestinian rights. The Israeli decision came after the Human Rights Council voted last Thursday to send an independent international fact-finding mission to look into the issue. The vote was 36-1 with 10 abstentions. The Israeli decision came one day after Israel's High Court of Justice rejected a compromise deal between the state and the people of the West Bank illegal settlement of Migron on Sunday. It would have prevented Israel from having to dismantle the settlement following a Supreme Court ruling. The court ordered the demolition of Migron because it was built on privately owned Palestinian land. Well, for decades, Israel has had uneasy relations with the United Nations, in part due to the pro-Palestinian majority in the General Assembly. The United States has used its veto power many times to block anti-Israel resolutions in the Security Council. The Middle East represented 76% of the United Nations resolutions, most of them critical of Israel. In November, Israel suspended its annual $2 million funding to UNESCO after the UN Cultural Agency recognized Palestine as a member. Israel described the move as a rejection of the path of negotiations. Relations with the United Nations were especially acrimonious over the UN Commission Goldstone report. That report found evidence that the Israeli military had carried out direct attacks against civilians in the 2009 war on Gaza. It said the assault was in part targeted against the people of Gaza. Israel refused to cooperate with Goldstone's team. So, is Israel violating Palestinian human rights in the occupied territories? And does that contradict its claim of being the only democracy in the region? Well, to help us answer these questions, we're joined by our guests in Jerusalem. Jessica Montel, Executive Director of human rights group B'Tselem. In Tel Aviv, we have Akiva Eldar, Chief Political Columnist and an editorial writer for the Haaretz newspaper. And joining us from London, Mark Ellis, Executive Director of the International Bar Association. Good to have you all with us. Akiva Eldar, if I could start with you. First of all, what do you make of this decision by Israel? And is this simply because the Human Rights Council will come up with another report that will put Israel in a bad light?
Yeah, I think that it's very clear to the Israeli government that it's not possible to both keep building settlements and violate the Israeli law, let alone the international law, and come up clean from an inquiry like this. So I think they decided that the best strategy is not to cooperate, to point out the fact that, and I think in a way, they have a point that the Council is a little bit too busy with the occupied territories relatively to other regions where we can see violation of human rights, and be the victim. You know, this is a very unique phenomena that Israel is able to play it both ways, to be to victimize the occupier. And they can trust the United States that when it will come to a vote, to something more serious, such as Security Council resolution, the United States will pull out its veto right. And actually it works in the Israeli public opinion that, look what's happening in Syria, look what's happening in many countries in Africa, in Nigeria, and the bad guys from the UN are still busy with the nitty-gritties of our occupation.
Jessica Montel, what implications do you think this is going to have for, on a practical level, for the international efforts to monitor Israel's policies when it comes to human rights?
Well, of course, Israel will not cooperate with this fact-finding mission. That has been the case with other fact-finding missions in the past. In this case, I don't think it necessarily hinders. It's not, I wouldn't expect the committee to uncover some secrets. I mean, the settlement policy and all of its implications on Palestinian human rights are very well known. You have many reports, both by B'Tselem as well as other Israeli and Palestinian and international organizations, very thorough documentation about the settlements and about the human rights violations that they cause. So the committee, in that sense, the fact-finding mission, will be able to produce a good report, assuming that the members of the committee are credible and independent and professional, can produce a good report without Israeli cooperation. But Israel's announcement is that it is severing ties not only with this fact-finding mission, but with all of the UN human rights mechanisms, with the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as all of the other offices within the High Commissioner's office and the Human Rights Council. That would be a blow, I think, for Israel and for the cause of human rights. Certainly the High Commissioner's office, that has done a very credible job, not only regarding Israeli human rights violations, but holding accountable Palestinian authorities as well. I mean, it would be a real shame to throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you like. It's true. I agree with Akiva that Israel is correct in its criticism of the Human Rights Council and its even structural bias against Israel, but this cannot be an excuse for justifying settlements or for claiming that settlements don't cause very real violations of Palestinian human rights.
I want to talk about the bias issue a little bit more, a little bit later in the discussion, because that is certainly a point of discussion that we can talk about in a bit more detail. But I want to turn to Mark Ellis now. You're the legal expert among us. From a legal standpoint, is Israel prejudging this issue, do you believe?
Well, yes, I think Israel is, and it's always unfortunate, I think, when Israel decides not to engage in these types of fact-finding missions, as it did with the Goldstone Commission, because I think the focus, as Jessica has just mentioned, should be on the fact-finding mission itself and those that are being selected to represent the fact-finding mission. And if those individuals, again, are credible, they're fair-minded, they come with no bias, I then think it's to the advantage of Israel to engage, to present its position on these issues, as it should have done with the Goldstone Commission, because as we learned then, Justice Goldstone had said, well, he would have not found some of his conclusions had there been a greater participation by Israel. And so I think engagement should be the policy, and Israel should not be afraid to engage a fact-finding mission that is seen as fair. And that's the judgment, should be the fact-finding mission itself and the individuals selected to undertake the mission.
All right, we're going to broaden this issue out a little bit more now and talk about the fact that Israel has also been condemned for its use of administrative detention, which is detention basically without trial. And because detainees are not told the reason for their detention or shown the evidence against them, they cannot challenge it. Detainees are also not told when they will be released, although the maximum period is 6 months. In practice, it can be renewed indefinitely. Now, Palestinian prisoner Hannah Shalabi has been on a hunger strike for more than a month. She is being held without charge in an Israeli jail. Her protest follows that of Khadir Adnan, whose hunger strike finally ended when he secured a release date in April. Cal Perry has more now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
Hannah Shalabi has spent the majority of the past 3 years in Israeli detention. She was released last October as part of a deal to free Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, but was detained again in February. Her cause, like many others recently, has sparked regular demonstrations in the occupied territories, highlighting the Israeli army's use of what it calls, quote, administrative detention, under which it can imprison people for up to 6 months without bringing an official charge. Her lawyer says this is against international law.
They are an unjustified arrest against Palestinians. The arrest is not based on any evidence or laws. These arrests contradict with all international laws and the 4th Geneva Convention.
Hunger strikes by Palestinian prisoners have been going on for years. Bashir al-Hiri has been detained 6 times. Now 70 years old, he runs his own law practice in Ramallah. He believes a hunger strike is a matter of last resort for prisoners.
Hunger strike is the last weapon a prisoner can fight with. Because a prisoner can only fight with his moral or will, every day that passes without prisoners' demands being met is a battle won against the jailer.
Al-Hayri has seen firsthand the effect a hunger strike can have on resistance. His first hunger strike in 1976 lasted for 46 days.
Jailers used to tell us, we've become celebrities outside. Whenever we'd get out, people used to ask us, not how are you, but what is the situation with those on hunger strike?
For him, today is about mass movements, more than just one or two prisoners going on strike, but a majority at a time.
There is a difference between collective strike, where people can support each other, and individual strikes. The individual strike is 1,000,000 times harder because one is fighting the battle alone.
The idea of collectively striking is growing rapidly across the occupied territories. We're seeing not only demonstrations and clashes, but also a grassroots nonviolent movement. Here in Ramallah, a tent has been erected for Hana Shalabi, and a number of people here are already on hunger strike, showing their solidarity. Cal Perry, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
All right, so Jessica Montel, if I could turn back to you on this. To what extent does this bring the issues, the larger issues of human rights into play in Israel when we talk about these indefinite detentions?
Well, the first publicized hunger strike of Khadr Adnan and now Hana Shalabi has really put the issue of administrative detention back on the public agenda, and in a very welcome way. Israel is holding over 300 Palestinians without trial or charge in administrative detention on the basis of secret evidence. People don't know why they're being held, have no real meaningful opportunity to refute any of the allegations against them, and don't know when they will be released, because at the end of the 6 months, we see that detentions are renewed again and again. So administrative detention is a real problem. It's not one particular detainee or another, but the whole system, the way that Israel is manipulating what should be a rare exception in terms of international law. In fact, it's really an assembly line of administrative detention in Israel for years and years.
Akiva Eldar, I mean, can Israel really call itself the only democracy in the region when it pursues this sort of policy?
I can say that Israel is a democracy relatively to our neighbors. I think we have a longer history of exercising democratic values, elections, free elections. We only assassinated our prime minister once. But once you cross the green line and you go into the occupied territories, that here applies different laws, such as, we have been talking about the settlements. Well, keep in mind that Israel does not consider those territories as occupied on one hand. In the peace negotiations, the argument was that these are disputed. This is a disputed area, and so Israel has the right to build settlements, and Israel is not transferring citizens by force, but they are voluntarily moving there. So it's very complicated because it depends where you draw the line of democracy. Now, I'm really afraid that it doesn't work like this, because democracy doesn't have really borders, especially not such borders as you have between Israel per se and the occupied territories, which are completely unnoticed. There is no fence between. There is a fence, but only for Palestinians who cannot cross it. So I think it's becoming more and more difficult. On the other hand, if I was an Israeli official, which I'm not, I would say, look at what's happening in Guantanamo. We can look at the United States and even NATO, the way they are practicing democratic values in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And we have not invented the procedure of administrative detention. But as I said, I'm not an Israeli official.
Mark Ellis, what are some of the legal issues at stake here, particularly when we're talking about Israel's policy in occupied territory and this policy of detaining people for indefinite periods of time in in occupied territory as opposed to inside the state of Israel? What's in play here from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, it actually doesn't matter. There's nothing in international human rights law that would permit a state, and I'm not now just focusing on Israel, but on any state, to indefinitely detain an individual without due process. It's just inconsistent with all aspects of international law. And I agree there are states other than Israel that's engaging in this very egregious violation of international law, including, as was just stated, the United States on Guantanamo Bay. But Israel as a democracy should not be looking at the lowest common denominator of what other democratic states do. Israel needs to move up from that and show its greatness by abiding by international law. And that, as I say, is absolutely clear in ensuring that individuals are not indefinitely detained without trial.
Jessica, you were agreeing to some of that?
Yes, of course. I mean, the fact that other places are worse than us, you know, this is frequently the justification of Israeli officials. There are plenty of policies that perhaps they know can't be justified, right? There's no way to defend certain things that run counter to basic principles of fairness and justice. And then the response is to say, but other places are worse. But it's a small comfort to people who want their own country to live up to the highest ideals of justice and human rights. Obviously, it's a small comfort to the victims as well to know that people in other places are suffering. Of course, this is no answer at all, and Israel can and must do better in terms of its human rights record.
Akiva Elder, isn't Israel being short-sighted here in the fact that it may be missing an opportunity to work with the Council and explain and defend its own policies to them?
I think that Israel is in a no-win situation because if you participate, you will have to respect the findings of the committee, and you won't be able to argue that they didn't hear what Israel has to say about it. On the other hand, if you don't participate, then of course you can't complain that you didn't get a chance to raise your voice and to come up with your point of view. Because as we said before, you know, there is no country in the entire international community, including our best ally, the United States, that believe that the settlements are both legal and helpful to peace and not an impediment to the peace process with the Palestinians. So this is the weakest point for the Israelis. So they play the weak party that, as we mentioned before, that the Council is biased. But look, what at the end of the day happened to Israel after the Goldstone report. Goldstone regretted he published this article in the Washington Post, actually apologizing. Israel was not brought to trial for violation of human rights during the Operation Cast Lead. So at the end of the day, this will be forgotten, and they will keep building settlements. The United States will keep vetoing resolutions in the UN institutes, and you know, business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, let's put that point to Mark Ellis then in London. I mean, Akiva Elder makes the point there that we can talk all we want about the violations of international law and human rights and so on and so forth, but the policy that has been going on for several years now will continue unabated.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is, I agree, a political fact. I would prefer to see Israel position itself so it engages with these types of fact-finding missions and sets out its reasons for and justifications for the policies that it's implemented. And I suspect they could make some strong cases. But it instead tries to isolate itself from the international community under the guise of protecting its sovereignty or protecting a situation where it could be criticized. But as a democracy, it needs to be open to that type of international criticism. In the end, though, I think the most powerful voice will be inside Israel. Groups like Jessica's groups. This is where I think change will occur. Some of the most significant, important decisions have not come from outside Israel, but within Israel. And for instance, the Israeli Supreme Court, some very profound decisions. And so I'm hopeful that these voices will continue to press for Israel to engage more openly on these issues within the international community.
Yeah, Jessica, if I could turn back to you on this. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about this perception of a bias on the part of the UN against Israel. And if that's the case here, isn't that also because of the fact that there has been zero accountability for some of the things that Israel has done over the years?
Well, again, the fact that the Human Rights Council has a bias against Israel does not mean that they are not correct to say that Israel has there are very serious human rights concerns regarding Israel's policies. So I think it only weakens the Human Rights Council's ability to serve as a moral voice on behalf of human rights. The fact that, of course, other foreign policy and political interests are at play in terms of the member states that are sitting on the Human Rights Council. For me, what is most significant, and I think the most welcome development, is that we are framing settlements as a human rights international law issue. Settlements are not only part of this political, diplomatic conversation, which of course they are, but particularly when you don't have any diplomatic progress in terms of resolution of the issue, then of course the entire international community has to insist upon respect for international law and respect for human rights and discuss settlements within that framework.
Akiva Elder, is that likely to happen as long as we have this Israeli government in place right now? I mean, how much did politics play a part in all of this?
It's all about politics. You know, the voters of the Likud and the other partners of the coalition have a warm heart towards the settlers. They feel that they belong to them. They have a lot of power in the Likud center, and Netanyahu has to be very careful because Israel is turning right, and he can't afford politically to turn a blind eye. You see, the Prime Minister is personally involved in this matter of less than 100 people in Migron. You know, he is investing so much time and energy to try and tackle the High Court decision to remove them in 4 months, not because, you know, it is a strategic point that Israel cannot afford to live without it. It's because of their political power. And when he is balancing their influence and their impact on his political future vis-a-vis the international pressure, their pressure is much more effective.
Jessica Montel, how do you see this playing out then in the next few months? I mean, do you expect further decisions like this?
Well, it's clear the next step is to see what is the composition of this fact-finding mission. It's very important that it be credible, independent, non-partisan professionals that are committed to human rights and not any particular state or political agenda. If that is the case, then we would hope to see a very fair and honest analysis of human rights implications of settlements. I would not expect Israel to cooperate with that fact-finding mission, but again, I don't think that would hinder their ability to get access to information. You're not, unlike Operation Cast Lead, where you really needed Israeli cooperation in order to understand what was going on and why Israel behaved as it did. Regarding settlements, I think virtually all of the information is public and available and very well documented. And then the real question is the determination of the international community to address settlements. I mean, particularly I'm talking about Israel's allies, to address settlements as a human rights obligation.
All right, and on that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all three of our guests in Jerusalem, Jessica Montel, in Tel Aviv, Akiva Eldar, and in London, Mark Ellis. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.